All right, class. We're going to be talking about Theodore Roethke, and one of the things about this poet is that he fits into kind of modernism and then starting to change over into this kind of post World War II poet because he has elements of both. He uses a lot of heavy symbolism like the modernists, and that's still popular, going into this new era. Um, but he is very minimalist as well with his writing. He is doesn't use a whole lot, of words, and his poems are not very long. They follow a lot of them follow very strict poetic forms like villanelles or sonnets or sestinas. And one of the poems in particular we're gonna look at is a villanelle. So I wanted to include this information for you. The poem is "The Waking," just so you can see. There's a lines in a villanelle have to be repeated. Certain whole lines have to be repeated in certain places in the stanzas, and there has to be a rhyme scheme. And the idea is to kind of build up, a certain tone. It can be kind of haunting, or it can be kind of sound insane, or it can sound very meditative and philosophical because of the refrain. And if you really have some kind of put some words in them that are pronounced quickly, they move very fast. Uh, but so we're going to have a villanelle, so I included that information for you. So Rilke here was a pretty interesting poet. I think knowing the term dichotomy is helpful. Dichotomy is when you have two things that don't seem like they can exist in the same space, but yet they do, two opposites or extremes. And I think that really sums up a lot of his poetry because his childhood, he had a dad who was very loving and had some positive stuff, but he could flip like a light switch too, and things could get very intense and violent. And his dad, had a greenhouse, and so that kind of relationship with his father kind of got kind of transposed onto this greenhouse where he saw like the very strict kind of German heritage from his father, that was, pruning and cutting and trying to order this greenhouse that was kind of wild and trying to grow wild and lush and do its own, do its own thing. And he saw those extremes. But let me just read you a couple of quotes um, about Rilke. The greenhouse world, Rilke said, represented for him both heaven and hell, a kind of tropics created in the savage climate of Michigan, where austere German Americans turned their love and order and their terrifying efficiency into something beautiful. And his life itself was haunted like this. Rilke's poetry often reenacts this schooling of the spirit by revisiting landscapes of his childhood. The nature poems make up the largest part of his early work, and they try to bridge the distance between a child's consciousness and the adult mysteries presided over him by his father. Rilke arranged and rearranged these poems to give them a sense of spiritual autobiography, um, a reality harsher than reality. Um, let's see. In the nature poems, it is by focusing on the minute processes of botanical growth, the rooting, the budding, that the poet found a way of participating in the mysteries of once alien world. And then, so you get away from the nature poems a little bit, and you get these love poems that are slightly different, more positive, and the nature poems tend to have more extended landscape and natural analogies, especially later on when he's considering death, because he's an alcoholic, which ultimately kills him. He becomes concerned with nature analogies being connected towards, the human passage toward the dark unknown, what waits for us afterwards. And you see that in the dark time. Uh, let's see. Some of his poems, especially the ones about childhood, explore the regenerative possibilities of pre-rational speech, like like children's riddles and rhymes, and um, the beginnings of language, where sound kind of recaptures non-logical states of being, and stuff like onomatopoeia and stuff like that. And those poems, uh, Rilke really plays with the possibility of language, and there's a lot of double meaning. Also this dichotomy. The meaning of what the child understands things to mean versus what the adult intends or understands language to mean. But that's what you kind of want to look out for as you look through Rilke. You're going to see a lot of the modernist characteristics, but you're going to see some of this new ideas, that we have of minimalism and uh, well, anyways, of minimalism and heavy symbolism and regionalism. Although you're not going to see much regionalism with him. Real quick, let's look at one of his poems, "My Papa's Waltz." The whiskey on your breath can make a small boy dizzy, but I hung on like death, such waltzing was not easy. We romped until the pans slid from the kitchen shelf. My mother's countenance could not unfrown itself. The hand that held my wrist was battered on one knuckle. At every step you missed, my right ear scraped a buckle. You beat time on my head with a palm caked hard by dirt, then waltzed me off to bed, still clinging to your shirt. I think out of all his poems, this one most directly shows you that dichotomy, that extreme. Students always write argumentative essays on this one, whether this whole thing is just, a kid roughhousing with the dad and standing on the dad's, feet while they dance. It's to the tune of a waltz. It's about waltzing, but there's all this double meaning, and innuendo, like the whiskey on the breath and hung on like death, and such waltzing was not easy, and the mother unfrowning, and the ear, you know, the battered knuckles of the dad, and the right ear scraping a buckle on his, belt, and all this stuff, and beat time on my head, and there's all that stuff can be explained by playful play and dancing, and the kid standing on the father's feet, and the father holding the hands, and his head's right by his buckle, so his ear scrapes his buckle, and it's just innocent. Or there could be child abuse being, implied here, and I think Rilke probably intended both, because of the relationship with his father. But you can see we keep to, it's very minimal. It relies on imagery, it relies on double meaning and that play with language. Um, you know, uh, so wonderful poem, wonderful poem. Uh, the Waking. This one is the Villanelle. I don't want to go over each one for you because I have a time limit on how long these lectures can be. But you can see that there are parts of this waking that is repeated. There is a lot of double meaning again in all of his work. And this one, of course, the waking is about enlightenment, about coming into one's own late in life, about uh, coming into love late in life, about coming into the self or slowly, or it being a process. You have an entire double meaning here. Well, anyways, I hope you enjoy this little bit on Rilke. There are several other poems to be, to be considered. Again, you're going to see the heavy use of nature imagery, like I discussed. I'll leave that up for you to find. It's not very hard, and and look for more double meaning, heavy symbolism. Okay, thank you.